Good evening, I'm Kathy Lewis, and here's what matters. When you look at that little heart you may have on your driver's license, the one that says that you agree to be an organ donor, you may not give it much thought, but right here in Hampton Roads there is an organization that works behind the scenes to link donors with recipients. In fact, it's one of the largest such organizations in the country. Today, though, LifeNet is about more than organ donations. It's about tissue donations as well. But for the size of the effort, it still comes down to individual stories about individual people. And Lisa Godley has a few of those tonight.
I used to say, Paul, don't ever let somebody knock on the door and tell me you've been in an accident. And then there it was at midnight. I had that knock on the door that every parent dreads.
On a rainy night less than a mile from the family's home in Chesapeake, Cindy Harris's only son was in a single-car crash. 18-year-old Paul Harris had no broken bones but suffered severe head injuries.
And when we saw him in the ER that night, there was only a tiny scratch on his left hand, and other than that, you wouldn't have known there was anything wrong with him.
What would follow was what Cindy Harris and her family describe as their week of grace. Doctors gave Paul a 70% chance of survival, and the family was optimistic. Paul was strong and athletic. He was an avid soccer player, the kind of guy who would play whenever he got the chance. But the 18-year-old Eagle Scout never regained consciousness.
We were told there was no hope, that his brain would never recover, and so our decision was to let him go with grace and dignity.
Once the Harris family decided to take Paul off the ventilator, their next thought was LifeNet. Their decision was confirmed when they got the word that Paul was already listed as an organ donor. He'd checked the box when he got his driver's license at age 16.
But immediately after he died, that night we came home exhausted. The next day we had family and friends just flowing in, and we were sitting talking, and the phone rang, and it was one of the people from LifeNet, from Donor Family Services, and they said Paul's liver had gone to a 70-year-old man. His 2 kidneys had gone to women in their 50s.
And that was only the beginning.
People in 11 different states have been given a gift of life from Paul. There's so many potential recipients when someone donates life. 69 that we know of right now.
Cindy shared with us a letter she'd received from the mother of a young girl who'd benefited from Paul's tissue donation.
It just made us all smile because this teenage girl, she said, my teenage daughter can now return to her passion of playing soccer. The donated tissue will allow her to return to the field where she really loves to be. And that's awesome. I mean, you know, you can't ask for anything better than that.
Cindy later received another letter from a woman whose 10-year-old son would have been crippled by the age of 20 without Paul's bone donation.
Through these gifts, you know, there's somebody out there enjoying a more productive life, or someone who's not in pain anymore because Paul was able to help. Then he has his purpose in life.
Each year, LifeNet Health saves over 300 lives by coordinating organ donations with transplant recipients. They also provide more than 250,000 patients with tissue grafts to improve their quality of life. And they've been doing so for the past 25 years. That's about the same length of time that Rita Ridley Cornegay suffered with sarcoidosis. The rare disorder attacked her lungs and over time destroyed them.
So all those years I was in and out of the hospital, pneumonia, lung infections, asthma. I had really bad asthma that was onset from the sarcoidosis. So, you know, there was many times I thought I would make it.
Rita, a former fitness instructor, was now on oxygen 24 hours a day.
If I went somewhere, everything depended on being back within 2 hours to refill my oxygen cylinder that I took along with me.
3 years ago, her condition got so bad that the once very active mother of 4 feared the worst.
Honestly, I was on all the medication. It was on so much prednisone. My voice had changed. It was horrible, horrible. And I was really thinking of making my funeral arrangements so that my husband wouldn't have to deal with that.
She called her doctor, who put her on the list for a double lung transplant, and in April of 2005, she had the surgery.
I don't have to take that anymore. I can actually breathe on room air, and I have been able to breathe on room air since the transplant, since I woke up. So that's miraculous. It was very funny. After I was out of the hospital and I would walk out of a room, I would go back and I would look like I forgot my purse, I forgot something, and I realized I forgot my oxygen tank. So that was pretty wonderful, something to forget.
Rita's body would reject her new lungs twice, but with the right antibodies and medications, she eventually returned to an active life, which included running a 100-meter dash and the 5K at the transplant games.
And just knowing that the worst day of someone's life, the most unbelievable, tragic day of someone's life, someone is going to ask them to donate their organs, and it's going to be a life or death decision for someone else. It's one of those things that you just maybe don't know about because it hasn't touched your family. But boy, oh boy, when it touches your family or someone you love or care about, it's a brand new world, and you're going to see just how beneficial it is.
For What Matters, I'm Lisa Godley.
And we are happy to welcome LifeNet's Executive Vice President, Doug Wilson. He's part of a management team of a pretty big company with more than 500 local employees already. And Lisa Dick joins us as well, and she is the wife of a tissue donor. Thanks to both of you for being with us. May I start with you, because I think your story is so compelling and I want to be sure that we have time to sort of tell it. So you're all right with that if we start over
here? This is what we're all about.
Right? Good enough, good enough. Well, I'm very happy to have you with us tonight, and thanks for being willing to tell your story.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to tell my story.
So you were at church one Sunday morning?
Absolutely. I went to church, a married woman, and came home a widow. We left church, went for breakfast, and got in the car, filled with much discussion of future plans. And
you just happened to say, I'll drive, or you happened to have gotten behind the wheel?
Well, it happened to be my van. Although Dale drove to church and drove to the restaurant, we were so busy talking, I got in the driver's seat, and thank goodness I did. I had backed out, went approximately 2 car lengths forward, and I heard a noise. And
something that made you look?
I looked over at him, and he had hit the recline on the seat, and he was laying back. The second I touched him, I knew something was different. We were only moments from Beach General. I drove probably like a crazy person to Beach General. I think I knew then that he was gone, but of course I was not consciously going to acknowledge that.
So you had one hand on the horn and one hand on him driving down First Colonial.
Yes, and I was just sure I felt his pulse. Later the doctor assured me it was my own that I was feeling out of sheer fear. But the folks at Beach General were wonderful. They ran out immediately. They worked on him for 20 minutes when the doctor finally told me that he was gone.
And there are a couple of key points in this story that are really important when it comes to organ donation. One is that I think you knew your husband was an organ donor. You all had talked about this.
Absolutely. Dale spent 30 years in the military and in the submarine force. So death and dying were something that we definitely talked about, and we both felt very strongly that we should not take to heaven anything that can be left here for someone else to make their life better.
And so this obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, I'll ask you, I'm guessing that in the midst of all of this trauma, sudden death, you're not thinking, oh my goodness, my husband was an organ donor. Isn't that a marvelous thing? Somebody came to you and said, what?
Well, actually, you're right on target. At that moment when someone tells you the love of your life is gone, you can't think of anything. You don't know your own name. The doctor graciously came to me and acknowledged the fact that Dale's driver's license indicated he was an organ donor, and we also had that on our records at Virginia Beach General. I'm so grateful the doctor took that time to come to me and ask if I was willing to make that donation. At that moment, I wouldn't have thought of it. Maybe 3 months later, I would have.
And it would have been too late.
Absolutely, because that needs to be taken right away.
Right.
And
so he had had a massive heart attack is what eventually they learned about this, which meant that there were some of his organs that they just really couldn't do anything with from that perspective.
exactly. He had been without oxygen those few moments from the time this happened until we got to Beach General. Probably less than 2 minutes without oxygen, but unfortunately
It was enough.
the organs need to have oxygen the whole time. But they were able to utilize Dale's eyes, so today 2 people see that would not have otherwise seen. They're seeing a rainbow, an ocean, a butterfly, a grandchild.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing thing. I mean, isn't that? I mean, that's...
Yes, just think how much better off they are.
Yeah, and then the tissue donation as well.
Tissue donation is extremely important, and we don't hear as much about that. And people don't realize how many can be helped. Dale was able to help 117 people by tissue donation in 22 states and 2 other countries. And
that's amazing.
yes, when you think someone is running or using an arm or a leg, or a burn victim whose arm skin is much better off today because of it, there's so much that tissue can do to improve the quality of life for others.
And you have, I mean, you would feel confident of the fact that in that day, that may or may not have been so much a comfort to you. But I'm thinking that in the time since then, that has to be a huge comfort.
Oh, it is a tremendous comfort. Dale is not gone. Dale is not dead. He lives through others. And maybe I don't know who they are, but I know that others are better off, and he was such a generous, giving, kind person. It just only made sense that he would do this and help someone else.
It's very consistent.
Yes, and it just makes me feel good every day.
Good.
And we're so fortunate here in Tidewater to have LifeNet Health. My LifeNet family has been so supportive.
I think they're fortunate to have you. You're very compelling at telling the story.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you for doing that.
My pleasure.
Wow, what a story. Doug Wilson, I know you probably hear stories like this every day, and that must make your job pretty terrific.
Yeah, but it doesn't change the poignancy of everything. And you're right, we're lucky to have people like her that tell her story. And right now, there's a little bit of Dale all over the world. And she may not know who they are, but these 117 recipients, they know who he was. They might not know his name, but they know how meaningful he was to getting them back to work, to play, to picking up their baby, to exercising, to living a healthier life.
And we can pretty clearly get the visual on the eye piece of it, the eye donation. The tissue is probably a little hard for people to really think through what does that mean, and when Lisa said she he'd helped these more than 100 people. What kinds of help would tissue donation make for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. All kinds of help. Tissue is needed and used in almost every hospital, right here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but almost every hospital in the United States and beyond. It's commonly used to treat cancers of the bone, osteosarcomas, malignancies that either start in the bone or that they metastasize from organs somewhere else. A child or an adult may be facing amputation to get rid of the malignancy, or let's take the tissue out and perform a tissue transplant, keep the leg, keep the arm, and keep that person active. Disease of the spine and the musculoskeletal system, as we are all getting older. There's a huge prevalence of musculoskeletal disease. I believe musculoskeletal disease is the second most common reason why people like us go to the doctor, secondary to a headache. So a lot of these patients are going to finally need surgery. And allograft tissue, something that came from the body, is the most powerful healing agent to many of these musculoskeletal diseases, arthritic conditions, trauma. One story I love to tell is a boy in the backyard was standing in the wrong place when his brother swung the baseball bat. You know how many times we've all thought it's going to happen?
Yes.
And we were able to provide him with a brand new jaw made of allograft tissue.
So it seems that there's so much goodness in the story, and yet we know that you are searching for more organ donors. There's some people who just, for a lot of different reasons, don't want to donate organs. And certainly one can make that decision when one has the facts, but I guess your concern is that a lot of people are making that decision without necessarily having correct and proper information to make that decision. And so as you think about the myths that people have about organ donation, what are the main ones that come to your mind?
Well, there are a couple. I mean, you saw in the piece about this woman who is restored to health, and she's doing great. I think a lot of people still think that transplantation is a mystery and it's an experiment, and is it going to work? Well, you saw that. I mean, that's routine now. We've got the medications. We've got the immunosuppression problem solved for the most part. We've got very talented surgeons. We've got 100,000 people on the waiting list waiting for an organ. We don't have enough organs.
Wow.
That's the missing ingredient. So I think it helps people, and your story is very telling. It helps people to know this really works. This is not experimental. That's one thing.
Right.
Another thing is I think at times people are living under the myth that they're not going to get adequate care when they go to the hospital with a life-threatening disease.
If somebody's waiting in line for that organ, maybe they will rush you out of this world so they can get hold of that organ, is the fear.
Believe it or not, it is the fear. But as you know, there couldn't be anything further from the truth that the physicians that are treating patients of trauma or a head injury have nothing to do on the transplant side. And in Virginia, we have laws that ensure that if a person is declared brain dead, it has to be done by a licensed physician and another physician who has to be a neurospecialist. So the quality
Lots of safeguards in the system.
Lots
obviously.
of safeguards,
Yeah.
and obviously we have great talented
And you
physicians.
said they worked on your husband for 20 minutes.
Yes, they did. And it was as hard for the doctor
Sure.
to stop.
And your husband was very clearly gone.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And the young man that was doing the compressions, you know, even when the doctor said, it's time to stop,
Yeah.
he said, maybe
give it
just
one
a
more."
little bit longer. You know, I truly believe that our medical community would never stop trying if
they
it
thought
weren't
there was a chance. Sure,
Absolutely. So I hope others don't fear that.
But
And it's
that's
such
an
a good
old myth.
point, yeah.
It's an old myth that still exists.
And the other terminology, it seems to me, might be a piece of this, contributing to that. You know, when you use a term like life support,
Right.
it seems like maybe that does tend to add to the confusion.
It does. And at time when someone is in the hospital and in the ICU, they're on life support. But there comes a time when a patient is declared brain dead that really this support is mechanical ventilation. What it's doing is the person is dead, the person is gone when they're declared brain dead. But there are machines that keep their heart beating and their body temperature warm. So when you touch your loved one who may be declared brain dead, their skin is warm and they feel like they're not. But
that's because of the machinery.
that's because of the mechanical ventilation. And we work very closely with surgeons and neurospecialists and intensivists in all the hospitals to make sure that we all talk to families and explain this completely to them at this critical hour.
But is this term life support a little bit perhaps problematic in helping people understand that we're really talking about not necessarily life support, but mechanical?
It is,
support.
especially when it's used in conjunction with a donor situation. You know, my loved one is brain dead, but he's on life support. It's some terminology that can confuse the issue.
It sounds a little incongruous, and so it might be a little confusing for people. I know that you have some real challenges and are working very, very hard to find minority donors. I hope you'll forgive the question, but why would not one kidney work as well as another?
Yeah, one kidney usually does work as well as another.
Okay.
Here's a couple of things that contribute to this issue. I think there are some religious myths that are still out there in some communities that make people believe that their religion doesn't really support donation.
So it's not about the organs themselves, that question?
It can be a challenge, Kathy.
Okay.
Right now, there are nearly 100,000 people on the list waiting to be transplanted with some type of organ. About half those people are minorities. We need more minority donors with blood types that may more readily match our minority population on the list. So we really have an imbalance when we have half the people on the list that are minorities. Another thing that contributes to this is minorities are more susceptible to the need for a kidney transplant because high blood pressure, hypertension is more prevalent in that community at this current time. And there are great things going on in place to bring that down. But that's where the imbalance comes from.
Okay.
So we just have to work a little harder.
So the challenges for recruiting or helping to find more minority potential donors are what? Religious in some respects?
Yeah, I think it's education too. I don't think it's too far different from some of the general things we talked about. We want people to know transplants work.
Right.
You know,
and if you want to have an open casket, you can do that.
Absolutely. There really is no disfigurement.
No, absolutely not. We saw Dale the morning after at the funeral home, and you would never have known there had been any donation whatsoever. Now, in Dale's case, Dale was buried at sea, so he was cremated. But
you did see his body before
we
that
absolutely did, which was important because our oldest son and daughter-in-law live in Georgia, and they wanted to be able to see Dad once more. And we wanted to be sure, and the funeral home said, certainly, no problem, you can spend as much time with him as you want. And there is no reason people fear that the body will not be able to be presented at a funeral. He looked, actually we kind of joked about how much better he looked then, and then we realized that was kind of silly, but on Sunday as time went on, the discoloration and some swelling that took place.
Sure, of course.
But, education is a key factor here, letting people know that a lot of these stories are just myths.
And then, you know, and I hate to bring it up because I almost don't want to add any fuel to this thing because it's a complete and total myth, but we'll put it out there in case you are somebody who's worried about this. That old saw about, I heard somebody who went on a business trip and they woke up in a tub of ice and a sign on the mirror saying that someone had taken their kidney. I mean, it's been debunked all over the place. But just in case somebody's gotten that and still laboring under that delusion.
Yeah, we don't like to take kidneys out of hotel rooms and bathtubs, so it won't.
That's really not the best way to do it.
Yeah, it won't work here.
Yeah.
But a couple of, you know, crazy stories from third world countries.
Right.
These things. You know how the news is. These things have a life of their own, and they can be talked about for a long time, and they have legs.
That's just not.
It's just not possible.
Yeah.
There's a great system in Virginia and in the United States to fairly assess the safety and quality of organs that are donated, and then match them up with the recipient who is in the most need, and that means who's the sickest and who's the closest to where those organs are donated from.
And you can't buy your way up that list.
You can't buy your way up that list. You're a number on that list. You're not a rock star.
Oh, so it's done by that way, so that it really is a blind system in that respect.
Absolutely.
And this is such a great point because it brings us back to talk about this organization and this community. And I think we certainly didn't realize until we really started doing the research the significance of LifeNet, not just for this community, but really for the nation. It's an amazing center that's located here. A lot of people may not be familiar with its significance. Yeah,
our CEO likes to say we're the best kept secret in Tidewater.
Yeah.
But I think the last couple of years, a lot more people are learning about us. We have about 500 employees in Southern Virginia Beach, and this year we're going to distribute over 300,000 tissue transplants to patients all across the United States. And we're working very hard on the organ side of things too. There are 2,500 Virginians on the list waiting for an organ.
Wow.
And unfortunately, the statistics are not good. Some of them are going to die only because an organ is not available. So we've got our work cut out for us.
Yes, indeed. And boy, this brings us back to this very tough issue, which is that you don't know when this situation is going to present itself, and so you have to make these decisions ahead of time.
You need to discuss with your family, your husband, your children. They need to know how you feel about this.
And of course, with Thanksgiving coming up, it's a great time to let everybody know.
Perfect time. We're sitting around the Thanksgiving table. Say, hey, have you ever done this? This is not something you put on your list. Oh, groceries, the dry cleaner, the bank. Oh, do we want to organ donate? No, you need to sit down and talk about this. Some people have never thought about it.
Yeah.
I think another point is some people think you can only be a young person to donate.
Any age.
Any age.
That's a great point. Just make the decision.
Yes.
And so that's the easy part. Well, my thanks to both of you for being with us tonight. And thanks for your story. You do a marvelous job of telling it, and I think you've probably helped a lot of people. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Kat.
We have enjoyed and been challenged by your emails and your phone calls of late. Here's a quick sampling. From Ann Williams in Virginia Beach, I listened to What Matters twice that evening and appreciate hearing more on this topic and your commitment to educate the community about it. Education eradicates fear and builds bridges of understanding. And from Don Eilert of Hampton Roads, The problem is enormously complex, and the Latina lady actually demanded, without saying it openly, an amnesty of sorts. I'll be 80 on my next birthday, but I still think, let us invite Mexico to join the United States. They would be a territory first, then a state if they wish. It would be a benefit to us all. And while I certainly should have told you before we played that, you could probably derive that those comments were on our show on Hispanic immigration. And I heard from another viewer from Norfolk who wanted me to know her opinion that the children of illegal immigrants born in the U.S. should not be entitled to citizenship, that illegal parents should be deported right along with their children. One thing is for sure, the immigration issue is undoubtedly as complex as the reasons people are so desperate to come to this country. Alfredo Hinojosa Quiñones was so desperate. He was a youngster, and in the days of the devalued peso in his native Mexico, his father lost his small gas station, and one day Quiñones hopped the fence and crossed the border. He worked 7 days a week, sun up to sundown, picking fruit, then moved up in the world to loading sulfur and fish lard onto freight cars. With night classes and a speech coach who helped him complete an application, Quiñones became a student at UC Berkeley and later at Harvard, where he became a citizen. Today, he is Dr. Alfredo Hinojosa Quiñones, a Johns Hopkins neurosurgeon who teaches oncology and neurosurgery, directs a neurosurgery clinic, and runs a lab studying brain tumors. He performs nearly 250 brain operations a year, very likely using some of the products and services of LifeNet right here in Virginia Beach. We'll see you next Friday night.